Into the Breach, the latest game from the developers of FTL, is an exceptionally good turn-based tactical game that plays, in many ways, more like a puzzle game, and I love it, and it's fantastic, and it's also a bit tricky to get the hang of at first. So with that in mind, I put together some handy tips for players that have got most of the basics figured out. This is for those of you that have read through the various tutorial prompts, tried your hand at a few runs, and maybe unlocked some new pilots, but haven't yet defeated the final island. Here's some things to bear in mind when you next play. Number 1, this is a hugely important point to start on. Think about how your mechs and the loadouts they're using can benefit each other. Stop thinking about individual mechs and start thinking about a single, cohesive unit built around synergy. An example I really like is using the jet and the rocket mech in the same team. The jet's primary attack has it leap over an enemy doing a single point of damage, but also applying a smoke effect to that tile, whereas when the rocket mech fires, it drops a smoke on the tile behind it. In addition to this, the rocket mech also comes equipped from the start of the game with a passive ability that means smoke now damages enemy units. Suddenly, your jet is so much more useful in combat, and as your campaign progresses, you can start building really your entire playstyle around an advantage like this one. Throughout this game, for example, I bumped up the amount of damage my smoke was dealing and also equipped my combat mech with the smoke bomb ability, allowing each of my 3 units to tap into that bonus. Your team should be more than just the sum of its parts, that's the goal. It doesn't have to be smoke damage either, there are plenty of different playstyles. Maybe you want to build a team that's really good at controlling the positioning of enemy units, or that you can use to block enemy spawns really effectively. There are so many options. Just make sure you're always thinking about how your 3 mechs can work together. Remember, there's no I in mech, although, actually, come to think of it, there is a me. Ignore that. Synergize. Number 2, control the center of the battlefield. It's sort of like playing squash, a bit. You always want to be in the middle of the court. It gives you options and makes sure you don't spend your turn just scrambling to keep up with your opponent. Although this rule might seem obvious for units like the combat mech, who usually want to be up close and personal with their targets, if you're using one of the artillery mechs, for example, you may be tempted to keep them towards the edge of the map. That's what you do with artillery, right? Wrong. You want these guys to be in the center too, and why is that? It's because, yes, they can deal damage from a distance, yeah, I get that, but that's only one of 2 things that you really want your mechs to be doing each turn. You always want to make sure that they have the option to block damage if they need to. Sometimes you need a mech to take a hit to save a building or an objective, and when that happens, you don't want your artillery set up at the edge of the map. Keep everyone in the middle whenever possible and have them ready to take a hit should they need to. Number 3, make your moves first, make your attacks second. This is a simple one and a really easy way to improve your game. Get into the habit of moving each of your mechs to wherever they'll need to be before having any of them take an action. The reason is a good one. You can undo move actions as many times as you like. You can't undo an attack unless you're willing to use one of your reset turns. Getting everyone in position first can often reveal a stupid mistake you're about to make or point you towards a different approach for that turn. Move, undo, move again. This lets you get to grips with your turn before committing to a strategy. It's really good practice, and of all the tips, this one will probably make the most immediate impact on your game. Number 4, some enemy attacks don't really matter as much as you think they do, and it's worth identifying these early on. When the bugs choose their targets, they sometimes do you a massive favour, whereas an attack against a building or an objective should always be prioritised. If a Vek chooses to attack one of your mechs and can't apply the web effect and doesn't have a projectile, for example, you may find that you can simply move out of the way of that attack and potentially deal with the enemy on the next turn if you need to. So each turn, your first thought should be, which attacks do I actually need to stop first? That's really the way to think about Into the Breach as a whole. In fact, it separates it from many other turn-based tactical games. It's not about how much damage you can do this turn, it's more about how much damage you can stop. And sometimes they give you a freebie, so take advantage of that. Recognize which attacks you really need to deal with first and which you can maybe leave till later. Number 5, be careful with your blocks. Although it can be tempting to jump on a tile that promises to spawn another bug next turn, it's worth taking a moment to consider. These tiles won't stop trying to spawn that bug you just blocked until the final turn of a mission, which means you may well be creating yourself a bigger problem later down the line. You obviously want these bugs to appear when you can actually cope with them, so blocking a spawn point on a turn in which you've just cleared the board isn't necessarily a smart move. However, perhaps your turn hasn't gone as you'd like and there are still 2 or 3 Vek still left alive. That might be the time to block, as it'll buy you the leeway to deal with that previous wave. Sometimes with the right setup you can maintain a block for several turns and ensure the Vek just never arrives at all, which is great, and it can be worth trying certainly, but remember, it is a risk. If something unexpected happens while you're doing this and you then need to move the mech earlier than you'd like, you could be setting yourself up for a lot of trouble. Some of the worst turns I've had in this game are because I blocked 1 or 2 turns beforehand. Essentially what I'm saying is this: blocking Vek is a choice with pros and cons to consider, not just a no-brainer as you may have assumed when you first started the game. Number 6, turn order. Don't ignore this, it will save your campaign so many times. As you know, actions in Into the Breach don't all happen simultaneously. There's an order to these things, and one that can sometimes be difficult to predict, so don't try to do that. Instead, hover your mouse up here and read what's going to happen and when. It tells you incredibly important things, like whether the environmental damage in this map happens before the enemy unit standing on it gets to attack. If it does, that means you don't necessarily need to attack that Vek, you can spend your resources elsewhere. Here's another thing worth knowing: which Vek is going to attack first, and then second, and then third, and so on. If you know this, you can use it to your advantage and set things up so that a Vek who's about to attack a building gets killed by his friend instead. Understanding the turn order means that you can end your turn in complete confidence that you know what will happen next, and that is really quite a good feeling. So yeah, just check the turn order a lot. Okay, those are the big ones, I think. I'll end with a few quickfire tips to wrap up the video. Number 7, reputation is almost always the most important currency and the one you should prioritize when selecting a mission. Why? Because once you get to the end of an island, you can trade 1 reputation for 1 power, and so if you don't need any additional power, you've now got the option to spend it on a reaction core or an upgrade. It lets you make that decision rather than the mission deciding for you, and really the only time to go for power first is when you don't have a choice because of the layout of the island, or if you think you might not actually make it to the end of the island with your current power reserves. That's actually when you definitely have to make an exception. Number 8, speaking of mission objectives, if you manage to complete every objective in every mission you attempt on an island, you're given an additional reward at the end of that island. They're usually pretty great too, allowing you to choose between a new pilot or a mech upgrade or additional power. It's almost always worth aiming for, and sometimes means you should prioritize a mission objective over, dare I say it, protecting a standard building. Ooh, controversial. Number 9, and finally, just remember, to some extent you should also react to the random nature of Into the Breach, specifically when it comes to loadouts. Time pods, island rewards, and the shop are going to offer you different items with every single playthrough. And so you have to use what you're given. Keep that in mind. You're not always going to end up with the perfect setup. You're not always going to get every loadout you're after. You need to roll with what you're given and build a playstyle around the upgrades that make the most sense so far in your campaign. So I guess to build upon the first point in this list, synergize, open brackets, as much as you can based on the options you're presented with in this particular playthrough, close brackets. Alright, that's a good start, I reckon. If you've been playing Into the Breach and you have any tips of your own to share, you can let us know in the comment section below, and if any of these are particularly useful to you, do tell us, because yeah, we might return to this game next week if there's some interest. It's really good. I know they made FTL, I get that. This is better. I'm going to play every game this developer ever makes. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you next time. Goodbye.